guys, my name is Jennifer Brave. I am the founder and owner of Facets Relational Care, and today I'm going to be continuing my series on different kinds of abuse. And today I'm going to be talking about sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is a form of abuse that most people are familiar with. So in today's video, I'm going to give a general overview of what sexual harassment is, and then I want to talk about some specific examples of what sexual harassment is. In the last video that I made, Sexualized Conversation, that technically could fall underneath the umbrella of sexual harassment. That's one particular aspect of sexual harassment that, at least in the search that I have done on YouTube especially, you don't find a whole lot of information about it, so that's why I wanted to touch down on that. But today we're going to be talking about a variety of other aspects of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment has two different aspects to it. There is what's called the quid pro quo aspect, and I think this is the part of sexual harassment that a lot of people are most familiar with. This is a term that's usually heard within a work environment, and it is a suggestion or an implication, or in some circumstances, even a direct demand that an employee perform some kind of sexual favor in order to keep a position or get a promotion, etc., etc. The other side of sexual harassment could be summed up to say any sort of unwanted physical contact or remarks, sexual remarks made that could be offensive. I do want to make a distinction right now. Typically, sexual harassment, when we're talking about unwanted touch, we're talking about non-sexual touch, and the reason that I make that distinction here is because unwanted sexual touch is typically considered sexual assault. That's a different form of abuse. You could lump it underneath of the sexual harassment umbrella if you wanted to, but specifically it's a form of sexual assault. It's considered a separate type of abuse. So I want to talk about some lesser known aspects of sexual harassment, some examples, so that you can have what I hope to be a fuller picture or a better idea of what sexual harassment is. One example of sexual harassment is circulating or showing sexually explicit photos, materials, videos, things of that nature around other people who perhaps wouldn't have wanted to have been exposed to them. Sending any sort of sexually suggestive email or text message is also considered a form of sexual harassment. Leaving unwanted gifts or unsolicited gifts for somebody that suggest that you may have a sexual or romantic interest in them, especially if they don't have a sexual or romantic interest in you. That's another example. It can be jokes made about a sex or a gender or a sexuality, and perhaps somebody of that sexuality or that gender or that sex hears those jokes and is offended by that. It could even be perhaps a sexual comment if somebody were to comment perhaps on a woman's breasts or her ass, drawing attention to somebody else's sexual body parts like breasts or ass or genitals. Anything like that could be considered a form of sexual harassment. So it's a very broad term. If it were me, I think that I would describe sexual harassment as anything that belittles someone's gender, sex, or sexuality, or if anybody engages in any form of direct or indirect sexual conversation or behavior that's unwanted or unsolicited in such a way that it makes the person receiving that uncomfortable. So I may have mentioned it before in some of my previous videos a couple years ago, but I used to work in law enforcement. And for those of you that don't know, in law enforcement, sexual harassment in the workplace is just ridiculously common. It runs rampant, basically. So what I wanted to do today is to give you some examples that I've experienced that technically would fall underneath the heading of sexual harassment. In some of the examples that I'm going to use, I personally wasn't offended. It's really hard to offend me. And again, especially sexually, I'm a very open person, so there's not a lot there that offends me, but the examples that I'm going to use are things that could be considered offensive typically in most situations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the sexual material, explicit material, nude photos or pornography. When I was working in the police department, that was everywhere. And granted, none of it was necessarily flaunted, but we would have police officers that would huddle in circles together, and they would have their phones out and they would be showing each other some new video or something they saw on Pornhub, and they would watch clips of it together, or they would send nude photos of their own girlfriends or their own wives to each other because they wanted to see them naked. That is considered a form of sexual harassment, because if somebody had walked by and had seen that, or had, even heard some of the material from the videos that they were playing and felt uncomfortable with that, that could be considered a form of sexual harassment. I also want to give an example of leaving unwanted gifts that would imply that you are romantically or sexually interested in someone who is not interested in you, or who maybe even has said directly that they are not interested in you. When I was working at the police department, I had this happen to me once as well. We had a guy that would come in every now and again that would work on all of our tech stuff, and the majority of the computers that he had to work on were in my office. He would start bringing gifts for me every time he knew that he was going to come to work there and I was going to be on shift. So to give you a specific example, he one day had come and he had to work a 12-hour shift. So that meant he was going to be in my office for 12 hours. It just so happened that day that I was also going to be working 12 hours. So we had 12 hours together alone in my office. He had left at one point during the day to go get some ice cream, and he had told a couple of other officers and some dispatchers and other personnel that had worked there that he was going to go get some ice cream. And he came back and he had a bowl of ice cream for himself and then a bowl of ice cream for me, and it had, berries and chocolate and all of this stuff on it, which I had not asked for. And he had not offered to buy ice cream or bring ice cream for anybody else that he had told, anything at all like that. He just came back with one for me. The fact that he came back with one for me, and the fact that he bothered to put the chocolate drizzle and the berries on top, which indicates that he put thought into putting that together to give it to me, is an indicator that there was some sort of romantic or sexual interest there, and he was implying that by giving that gift. I was uncomfortable in that situation because I had absolutely no romantic or sexual interest in him. So in that particular situation, I would say that I was a victim of sexual harassment, because technically that is a form of sexual harassment. I remember at one point in this particular shift that I was working, we were talking, and he was explaining to me all of these different parts of these huge giant databases and computers and things that we had that I have no knowledge about whatsoever. And he lost me along the way in this explanation, and I think he could kind of tell. And he said, am I confusing you? Am I overwhelming you with information? And I said, yeah, I just don't understand at all what you're talking about. And he said, well, that's okay. Why don't you just sit there and look pretty? That's what you're really good at doing. And he said it in such a way that sounded like he was trying to compliment me, or again insinuate that there was some sort of sexual attraction there, and that comment made me uncomfortable as well. So other examples. We had a police officer one time that got angry at another police officer that we worked with, and he called him a cocksucker. That's sexual harassment. If you spread sexual rumors about an employee in the workplace, and again, not even in the workplace, if you spread sexual rumors about anybody that aren't true, and even if they are true, you have no business spreading any information about anybody else's sex life. But if you spread sexual rumors, the person who these rumors are about, they're the victim of sexual harassment. That's a form of sexual harassment. Unwanted touch. Again, not necessarily sexual touch here. I'm going to focus on non-sexual touch. Unwanted touch could be, to use an example again from the time that I worked at the police department, I had an instance one day where I was walking into the office, and there was a police officer that was passing me, and he just came up behind me and just smacked me on the ass. And I kind of stopped for a minute because it surprised me. And in this particular instance, That didn't bother me. I took it as a compliment, you know. Um, but I asked him why he had done that. And he had said, well, you have a nice ass. And, you know, I mean, I took it as a compliment, but if I had been uncomfortable in that situation, that would have been a form of sexual harassment. And we could argue that the act itself is sexual harassment, but I also want to place some emphasis on the way that the person who is receiving that behavior receives the behavior. Because if it's something that doesn't bother you, I would argue that in those instances, it's not sexual harassment. It's okay. It's something that you're allowing. It's something that you're okay with. Again, at work, I was a 911 dispatcher, and there was a city bus driver that came in one day on my shift who was lost on his own route. And he had come in to ask for directions, and he couldn't tell me where he was. He didn't know what intersection his bus was at. He couldn't tell me were there any offices on the corner, what was he parked next to, buildings, houses, anything at all like that. So I didn't have any way of knowing where he was. So I pulled out a map that covered a city map that covered the route that he took, and I showed him the map, and I said, do you recognize anything on this map? Maybe the last street you were on that you recognized, and maybe you turned and got onto a street that you didn't. And there was nothing on there that he recognized, and he started to get really frustrated with me. And at one point he said, I don't know why I came up here to ask you for help. As soon as I got up here and saw that you were a female, I should have just turned around and left, because females are never good with directions. Do you have a man that you can have like come up here and help me, because you're not going to get it. That was a very direct form of sexual harassment. Again, because he's insinuating that because I'm a woman, I wasn't able to give him directions. I had a similar conversation happen outside of the workplace. And this one was really unique because it happened with a complete stranger. In fact, this instance specifically happened in the middle of a major intersection. I was driving through a major intersection, and right as I'm in the middle of the intersection, my car just suddenly dies and stops. And I didn't know what to do. I was by myself. So not knowing what else to do and not being able to get a hold of anybody on the phone that I knew could come and help me, I decided to go into the neighborhood that was next to the intersection and just knock on some doors and ask, and hopefully maybe somebody would be nice enough to come out and help me. So he came out with me to my car, and I was thanking him profusely for his help. And he said, in a very frustrated tone, No, don't worry about it. I'm used to it. I know you women are completely helpless without us men, so I have to fix problems for you guys all the time. Just don't mention it. Just let me do what I do and stay out of my way, because I don't need your opinions or anything like clogging up my head right now. And it was really hurtful to me, and so I didn't know quite how to respond in the moment. So I waited for just a second. He was behind the car like he was going to push it. So I asked him, I said, do you want me to just go ahead and get in and steer it? And he said, well, I guess I don't have any other options. Do you know how to steer? And I said, yes, I know how to steer, in a little bit more of a frustrated tone this time. And he said, well, don't get mad at me. I was just asking you. Women can't drive for shit. And so he made comments like that. And then we got my car onto the street and parked it eventually in front of his house. And again, to be polite, I thanked him. And he said, it's okay, I get it. You don't have to keep thanking me. This is how things are. Women don't know how to handle anything. Men have to come up behind them and clean their messes all the time, okay? Don't thank me. Just go on. That is an example of sexual harassment. Another example, very, very similar. This happened with my family and with my ex-husband, who at the time we were dating. And I hate stories like this because when I look back on it, it's just sticking out that he was a narcissist and an abusive person. And it just kills me that I missed something so obvious as this. But my dad also, I know I've mentioned before, was a very abusive person. And at one point, my now ex-husband and I were sitting on the floor in the living room, and we were playing a board game, and my dad had come in through the house, and I was saying something along the lines to my ex-husband of, no, you can't do that. The rules say that you have to do it this way. And he was arguing and saying, no, that's not the rules. The rules are this way. And my dad, overhearing the argument, had poked his head in the room and talking to my ex-husband said, there's no point in arguing with women. You know she's not going to give up. They all think that they're right. You may as well just let her have her way. And my ex-husband said, yeah, I know what you mean, her especially. That was an instance of sexual harassment. The next example I'm going to use happened to me while I was in college, and I was taking like some sort of music class or something, music history or something. And I had a paper and I had written, and I missed the deadline to turn it in by one day. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll go talk to the professor and ask if he would allow me to turn it in even though it's a day late, because it was like 40% of my grade and I couldn't afford to take a 0 for it. So I had seen him coming out of his office the day after the paper was due, and I had my paper in hand and I started running down the hall to get to him because he was leaving, and I was calling his name and he turned around and he was waiting for me to get there to him. And I got there, I handed him my paper, I said, I'm so sorry, I did not intentionally mean to turn this in late, and I explained what had happened. And I said, would you please accept this and go ahead and grade it? I understand if you need to take some points off, but I obviously can't afford to take a 0 if it's 40% of my grade. And he said, yeah, I'll accept it if you go down to the end of the hall, turn around, and like come running back up to me again like you did. And when he said that, he was looking down at my breast the entire time. So the implication being he wanted me to go down the hall and do some sort of fucking Baywatch number so that he could watch my boobs bounce up and down while I was running. And this same professor, at another point during the course, this was after that incident, I was leaving class one day and he had really not even said hi. I was just walking out of the room and he looked at me and said, you remind me so much of my daughter. And he said it in kind of a weird way, like it made me wonder what was going on at home, you know what I mean? Another example, and this is another one that really bothers me because this is the family that my daughter is spending, you know, a lot of time with now. She currently lives with her dad and then his parents, his mom and his dad. And this is just one example that comes to mind. We were over there at their house once, and a commercial had come on TV. Ironically enough, it was like an anti-abuse campaign of some sort, and it was a lot of women, female athletes who the sport that they played involved a lot of running, and it was showing clips of all of these different women running, you know, in football and track and a variety of other things. And at the end of it, they would all stop and turn to the camera and they would say something along the lines of, yes, I do run like a girl. The implication being that women can run just as well as men can, and that to say you run like a girl is a sexually insensitive thing to say. And my now ex-father-in-law had made a comment, something along the lines of, oh, please, everybody knows girls can't run. Girls run just the same way as they drive, which is terrible. That was a form of sexual harassment. Another example, using my ex-husband's family. My ex-husband's dad's dad, it unfortunately runs in the family, so my ex-husband's grandfather. He had come down to visit for one holiday season, and my husband, for those of you that don't know, he has kind of a bizarre name. His first name is actually the name of a university here in the United States. I, of course, am not going to say which one in order to protect his identity. However, he shares a name with that university. So I had found that university had, you know, like shirts and things. They've all got the merchandise that they sell, and they had shirts that just had the name of the university across, you know, across the shirt, and it's his name. And so I thought it would be kind of fun to buy everybody in his family one of those shirts for Christmas. In fact, actually, I think it was Christmas because of this. It's also perhaps important to know at this point that my husband, his dad, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather all had the same name. So that's why it was a big deal. It was a family name. So I get the shirt, it has his name across the front of it, and I came in wearing the one that I got for myself, and his grandfather who was visiting saw the shirt and the word, the name of the university, as it does on most shirts for women, came across the breast area, and he looked at my shirt and said, "Wow, are both of those for him?" That is sexual harassment. By the way, a later incident, this time I was wearing a U.S. Army shirt, and it had, you know, Army, U.S. Army, same place. And I came in and he saw the shirt and he said, "Oh, now you're just giving them away to the men in service, huh?" Implying there that I'm a slut. And again, also drawing unwanted sexual attention to my breasts, which made me uncomfortable. So that too is a form of sexual harassment. Also, I want to say, when we hear stories about sexual harassment, in many instances, we're hearing about women who are being sexually harassed by men. There are many men who are also sexually harassed by women in many of the ways that I've discussed in this video, and perhaps in other ways as well. And I want to take a minute to defend the gentleman. I've observed over the past, I would say, approximately 10 years or so, we have gone from a culture and a society where we had men on top of women, and now what's happened with the feminist movement, and especially in modern times, women have become empowered, and again, instead of taking that empowerment and using it to build the equality that they want, which was the entire point of the feminist movement anyway, they're now using that new sense of empowerment to attack men, almost like they're trying to punish them for all of the time that women spent under them, or women spent as less than them, and that's not okay. Anyway, so that's a little bit about sexual harassment and all of the many different ways that it could look and the different environments that it could occur in. Yeah, it's a mess.